Story 3. 300 miles offshore is where the real dark starts. Not just the physical absence of light, but the kind of darkness that presses in, heavy and absolute. We were aboard the Selkie, a rusted-out trawler that smelled perpetually of diesel, salt, and stale coffee. It was 3 a.m., the graveyard shift. The waves were huge, slow monsters of black oil, sliding past the deck lights. We were pulling the main drag, the deepest tow of the night, and the winch was screaming. It wasn't the rhythmic protest of a full net. It was a desperate metallic shriek, the sound of machinery fighting something too dense to move. "Cut the speed!" yelled Captain Mike over the engine's drone. The cable was taut, humming like a low cello string tuned past its tolerance. It felt like we'd snagged the continental shelf itself. Mike feathered the hydraulics, easing the gear back toward the surface. Every foot gained cost a minute of agonizing tension. We all knew fish couldn't do this. This was a dead weight, a geological error we'd accidentally disturbed. When the net finally breached the surface, the initial relief evaporated instantly. The mesh was empty of cod and haddock, save for one spot near the lead line. There, suspended in the nylon matrix, was a single, impossibly dense mass. It was the size of a refrigerator carved from something that wasn't rock and wasn't metal. It was smooth, dark obsidian laced with subtle, swirling structures. It felt cold enough to burn. As we leaned over the rail, trying to decide whether to cut the net or risk the block, the water under the hull changed. The darkness vanished. A pale blue-white light began leaking up from the deepest depths. It wasn't an electrical glow. It pulsed with a terrible, slow rhythm, illuminating a vertical distance that defied the ocean floor charts. It was endless. Then came the sound. It wasn't heard through the ears, but felt in the chest. A pressure, low and resonant, like a cathedral bell ringing underwater. It vibrated through the hull, rattling my teeth. It felt like the core of the earth was speaking. I looked at Mike. His face was gray, his eyes wide and fixed on the glowing blue abyss. But he wasn't watching the light. He was staring through it. He dropped the hydraulic control and grabbed the rail, his knuckles white. "It knows," he whispered, his voice thin and cracked. "It knows we touched it." The light intensified, forcing us to shade our eyes. In that blinding clarity, I saw movement in the water far below the illuminated layer. Shapes too large, too slow, and utterly unlike anything that swims. They weren't fish. They were architectures. Mike screamed, a short, choked noise, and then began repeating a single, garbled name over and over again. We didn't discuss it. We didn't need to. I grabbed the axe, and one of the deckhands grabbed the gaff hook, and together we cut the net line clean. The obsidian weight dropped back into the water with a heavy thwope, and the blue pressure vanished instantly, plunging us back into the crushing black. Now we are running. The Selkie is pushing 7 knots, far too fast for this weather. We're burning fuel like mad, heading east toward the rising sun. No one has spoken a word since the light went out. The water is just water again, oily and cold. But we all know the truth. We didn't just drag up something heavy. We broke the seal on something that was meant to be buried. And we proved that down there things don't just swim, they wait. Story 2. It started with the cold. Not the predictable drafts of an old house, but a biting, unnatural chill that seemed to seep from the very wall behind my bedroom closet. I'd inherited my grandmother's sprawling Victorian 6 months prior, a house with more quirks than charm. Every floorboard groaned, every window rattled. But this particular cold was different, carrying with it a faint, cloying scent I couldn't quite place. One blustery October evening, I decided to investigate. Pushing aside moth-eaten coats, my hand grazed an anomaly. Halfway up the wall, beneath a peeling strip of flowered wallpaper, a section felt loose, hollow. Curiosity, a dangerous animal, stirred within me. I pressed harder. A faint, dry click echoed in the quiet room. A seam, expertly disguised by layers of paint and paper, became visible. My fingers found a small, almost imperceptible catch. With a soft groan of protesting wood, a rectangular panel swung inward just an inch. A rush of air, stale and heavy, hit me. It smelled of damp earth, forgotten things, and something else. Something faintly metallic, like old pennies or iron left out in the rain, mixed with a deeper, sickly sweetness. Beyond the gap, absolute blackness devoured the meager light from my phone. I grabbed my strongest flashlight, my heart beginning an erratic thrum against my ribs. Pushing the panel fully open, I peered into a narrow vertical shaft. Not a service duct, but too wide, too deliberately constructed. Crude wooden planks, affixed to one side, formed a makeshift ladder descending into the abyss. Hesitation warred with an instinct I couldn't ignore. I squeezed through, the old wood scraping against my shoulders. The air was thick, suffocating. My phone's powerful beam cut through motes of ancient dust, revealing rough-hewn stone walls leading down, into oppressive darkness. I descended slowly, each rickety plank groaning a protest under my weight. The shaft opened into a small, windowless chamber. The flashlight beam danced across cold, perpetually damp stone. The ceiling was low, pressing, making my breath catch in my throat. In the center, a single rusted metal chair sat facing the wall. On the wall, crudely drawn in something dark and flaky, were tally marks. Hundreds of them, scoring the stone from floor to ceiling. Each stroke an untold day. And beneath them, etched deeper, a single, small, childish handprint. My breath hitched. My grandmother had never mentioned anything. No one had. How long had this been here? Who had sat in that chair? Who had made those marks? The silence felt like a physical weight. Then, the light fell upon something on the chair's seat, a small, tarnished locket. I reached for it, my fingers trembling, the metal chilling my skin. I flipped it open. Inside, 2 faded sepia photographs, a smiling young woman and a small, solemn child. Their eyes, even in the faded images, seemed to bore directly into mine, not judgmental, but infinitely sad. A sudden, faint creak sounded from above, from the access panel I'd left ajar. I froze, every nerve screaming. I wasn't alone. Had the old house simply settled? Or had someone else heard me, responding from a place I couldn't see? The cold in the room intensified, no longer just a draft, but a palpable presence pressing in. The faces in the locket seemed to deepen their gaze, no longer solemn, but accusing. I scrambled back, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, my eyes fixed on the dark, empty space beyond the chair where the wall met the floor. I felt an icy finger trace down my spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Someone had been here. Someone was here. And they didn't want me to leave. I slammed the locket shut, the tiny click echoing unnaturally loud in the sudden, crushing silence. The tally marks seemed to writhe in the weak light, no longer counting days, but something far more dreadful. I didn't wait. I scrambled back up the makeshift ladder, fumbling blindly for the panel. As I pulled it shut, plunging the chamber back into absolute darkness, I could almost swear I heard a faint sigh, or a whisper from within. This wasn't merely a secret room. It was a tomb, and whatever restless thing resided there had just woken up. Story 3. The house was 100 years old and felt every minute of it, damp and argumentative. I was the one arguing back, tearing down the hideous laminate wallpaper in the dining room, a wall that always felt colder than the rest of the room. I was scraping near the fireplace mantel when my steel blade didn't hit plaster and horsehair. It grated against something hard, thin, and hollow. It wasn't a standard stud. I peeled back the decades of paper, then the layer of cheap, cracked plaster beneath it. What I uncovered was a vertical seam, too crisp to be a settling crack, running from the floorboard to the ceiling crown. It looked like someone had tried to hide the edge of a poorly fitted cabinet with caulk and spackle. Shifting my weight, I pushed gently near the top. There was a sound like a heavy exhale, and a section of the wall, about 3 feet wide, moved inward a fraction of an inch. A smell followed. It wasn't the sweet musk of mold I had grown accustomed to in this house. This was deeper, colder, a metallic mineral odor, like old cave air mixed with something faintly rancid, almost pharmaceutical. My heart hammered against my ribs, driven by a fear that felt less like danger and more like trespassing. I wedged a crowbar into the seam and pulled. The friction was agonizing, a slow, tearing groan of wood protesting release. The wall section swung open, revealing a vertical slice of impenetrable shadow. I retrieved my phone, switching on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a space that wasn't a room, but a cavity. It was a crawl space, smaller than a wardrobe, built directly against the stone chimney stack. The air inside was absolute zero, utterly dead. It stood maybe 5 feet high and was lined haphazardly with rough-cut pine boards. Empty, except for the floor. The dust here was thick, undisturbed by any recent draft, but in the center, there was a shallow depression in the grime. And in the corner, near where the cold air poured in, lay a single, cheap, child's shoe, a size too small, the leather cracked and gray. The truly sickening realization came when I examined the inside of the door I had just opened. It was covered in gouges, not big, frantic marks, but shallow, continuous scrapes, concentrated low down, near the bottom hinge. They were the markings of long, repetitive effort, made perhaps by a fingernail or a small, dull object, desperately trying to find purchase against the locked edge. I didn't step in. I didn't need to. The knowledge of what that cavity had been, and who had spent time in that absolute zero dark, saturated my lungs with that sickening, cold smell. I slammed the wall shut, the heavy thud rattling the plates in the nearby kitchen. The house was quiet again, but the silence was deceitful. I stood there, listening not to the house settling, but to the memory of those tiny, scraping sounds, now sealed behind plaster and shadow, forever part of the foundation.